Britain has the dubious honour of being among the worst countries at breastfeeding in the EU, or at least one of the countries with the lowest numbers. Performance perhaps doesn't really come into it. If failure to breastfeed is not already stigma enough, there's now a suggestion that mothers who don't are costing the NHS millions and risking preventable illness in their babies. Is there any truth in this? Is it one more thing to feel guilty about? And why, perhaps more importantly, do we find it so hard? Well, as all new parents will have discovered, Newsnight's on-air time coincides perfectly with the last feed of the evening. Susan Watts is with 3 mothers and 3 babies, and I can hear them already, Susan, in our green room.
Yes,
we'll get you an extra loud mic for that. Over to you.
A little bit noisy here, but anyway, thanks very much, Emily. And in a moment, we're going to be talking to the 3 ladies here who've joined me to share some of their experiences of breastfeeding. But first of all, what does today's report say? So this is a report from the children's charity UNICEF. And I don't know if you can still hear me, but the report has been looking at the economic case for persuading women to breastfeed. And UNICEF said to me that one of their aims was to use the economic argument because the other sort of methods for persuading women to breastfeed hadn't really been that successful. So what they've done is they've asked a panel of experts to look at the scientific and medical case for breastfeeding, and not surprisingly they've concluded that there are benefits for both the babies and the mothers. So for babies there's a reduced risk of stomach and breathing and ear infections, and for women longer term there can be a reduced risk of breast cancer, for example. And all these illnesses cost money for the NHS, so if you can bring those down, you can save money. So how does the UK rate when it comes to breastfeeding compared with other countries? Well, we don't do very well. So especially in duration of breastfeeding. Now, we have one of the lowest rates of breastfeeding in the world. So while 81% of women start breastfeeding, by 6 to 8 weeks, rates have fallen back to just under half of babies getting any breast milk at all. And by 6 months, only 25% of babies are getting any breast milk, and less than 2% are exclusively breastfed. And that's despite Department of Health advice that babies should be exclusively breastfed, if possible, for around the first 6 months of life. So the top line of this report then is that the NHS could save at least £40 million a year, they reckon, by preventing some of these costly illnesses if more women were persuaded to breastfeed for longer and given help to do that. So I'm joined now by Rima, Sarah and Hazel, who are going to tell me a little bit about their experiences of breastfeeding. So Rima, first of all, you're a breastfeeding support worker. Was it an easy choice for you to make?
It was, in a way, because I wanted to breastfeed, and knowing the health benefits of breastfeeding and having done the job, I wanted to experience it myself and relate it to how mums were feeling.
And did you learn anything from that process?
Yes, I did. I found it was difficult as well, and the way mums felt. So now that I do the job, I'm finding it more enjoyable because I can relate to the mums and share the experiences.
And Sarah, you decided to bottle feed. Can you tell us what led you to that decision?
Well, I just assumed kind of most people bottle fed. I mean, my mother bottle fed and most people I knew bottle fed. And so I assumed it was only when I got pregnant and I started going to antenatal appointments that I realised that I was kind of expected to breastfeed and that most people were expected to breastfeed. And I began to feel kind of quite a lot of pressure that this was what was expected of mothers, that we would breastfeed.
And Hazel, did you feel that there was pressure on you to breastfeed?
I had chosen to breastfeed already, and so I was actually welcoming a lot of the support and encouragement to breastfeed. But I was quite conscious of how little there was about bottle feeding as an alternative. Because I was already biased one way, it suited me. But it was very, very biased towards breastfeeding, very much.
Well, thank you all very much. And back to you, Emily. We're perhaps a little bit quieter for the rest of this discussion.
A miracle. Well, here with me now, Rosie Dodds, Policy Advisor at NCT, formerly the National Childbirth Trust, involved in that report. Charlotte Faircloth, who studies parenting for the University of Kent. And Francesca Entwistle, a midwife and lecturer in midwifery, who's also worked for the Department of Health to promote breastfeeding. What was interesting, just listening to the women there, was what different sort of preconceptions people have of what's expected. I mean, in your mind, Charlotte, is there a problem if we are one of the lowest breastfeeding nations in Europe?
Well, I think probably what the accounts of the women there show is that the kind of current approach isn't really working. There's a huge sort of drop-off of women who are breastfeeding very, very quickly. But I think probably these very one-sided accounts of the benefits of breastfeeding just really aren't very helpful at all. This sort of didactic approach that, breast is best actually leaves a lot of women feeling very, very guilty about what they do end up doing, and that's 98% of them, which is using formula milk at some stage.
Rosie Johns, I mean, broadly, would you like to see more women breastfeeding? Would that be a good thing?
The only reason we'd like to see that is because that's what women want. In general, as your report showed, 80% of women start breastfeeding, and of those that stop in those early weeks, 9 out of 10 of them would have liked to carry on for longer. So it's those women that we want to have the support they need to carry on for longer.
So if a woman gives birth and says, I just don't want to breastfeed at all,
that's up to her. It's absolutely.
So there's no pressure. You wouldn't like to try and change people's minds.
No, I don't think women should be under pressure. It's absolutely their decision. It's a very personal decision. There's a lot of factors that come into it, but women should make their own decisions and be supported in that.
And Francesca, as a midwife, you see women in this very vulnerable sort of initial stage, and a lot of women are basically not really taught how to do it. It's made to feel like it's something that should come very naturally, and it really doesn't. It's a very technical sort of learning curve, isn't it?
It is a learning curve, and women don't grow up in an environment in the UK where they see breastfeeding, so they're not picking up those skills naturally from their parents.
So you think it's because literally it's out of sight?
It's out of sight. In many families, 2 generations of bottle fed, and they're not picking up the skills intuitively. So it is the role of the support workers and the midwives and the health visitors to help them to overcome those challenges in the early days, and in the antenatal period to give them information and support so they can make a real choice. And I think what the evidence suggests is women need face-to-face support. They need to know when they're going to get that support.
I mean, why isn't that just built into the very first day, when a woman's given birth, that somebody comes round to her bed and literally shows them what to do? Because that's missing at the moment.
Well, I think it is built into the infrastructure, and what this report and what a lot of other reports are showing is that we need to keep training the midwives and retraining midwives. I myself trained 30 years ago when things were very different, and they have improved dramatically, but we're making progress, and we've gone from up to 81% since the last infant feeding survey, but women are still not continuing, so we need to put more infrastructure in, commission more services so that women don't feel guilty. They can make a real choice.
I mean, do you believe it does contribute to infant illnesses, a lack of breastfeeding?
I think my concern is that often these reports, as I say, they're very one-sided, and they take statistics which are actually, some of the sort of research that is used, is the data is a lot more uncertain than these kind of reports suggest. So quantifying benefits to the NHS in 10, 15 years' time. The evidence around things like gastrointestinal infections, that's more solid, but things like IQ, obesity, future cancers, it's really uncertain. And so my worry is that putting these very sort of quantifiable, these sort of amounts on it and making women feel like, they're costing the NHS X or Y. I really don't think that's very helpful.
That isn't what the report was designed to do.
I know you say it's not directed at mothers, but of course it ends up on programmes like this. Mothers watch Newsnight, mothers read the newspapers, and this
governments need to know that investing in breastfeeding will save them money. At the moment, everything's being cut back. We need the NHS and children's centres, local authorities to know that investing in breastfeeding will help both, babies will be sick less often, mothers will be sick less often, and more importantly, they'll be doing what they want to do if they get the support.
But when you phrase it in this way of stopping stopping a waste of money to the NHS, there are millions of ways that you could save £40 million on the NHS every year.
Absolutely. This is one thing, and it helps reduce inequalities in society, because we know that women with the lower income and less education are less likely to breastfeed, and it's those women who need the most support.
I'm sorry to
interrupt. And that's the kind of talk that you find too
This is what I find really problematic. As a feminist, yet again, poor women, women with less education, are basically being blamed for a wider social inequality.
We're not blaming women at all.
Things like education. Breastfeeding is not a magic bullet. You can't breastfeed your way to being middle class. think breastfeeding has benefits. Breastfed children do tend to be healthier.
But that's a very simple equation, isn't it? It costs less money if you provide it yourself. I mean, that's pretty easy.
But it's only free if a woman's time isn't worth anything. You know?
But it costs money. It costs time to formula feed as well. It's not to do with it
somebody else
being
can do it, is what I'm saying.
Free.
I think it's not really about it's not about saving the money from the NHS. We can invest that back into supporting women effectively so they have real choice. At the moment, women they stop breastfeeding and go to bottle feeding because they can't solve the problem and they're not getting the support they need. If we empowered them and gave them the self-confidence and the self-efficacy to overcome those problems and have solutions, then if they want to then go on to bottle feed or partially breastfeed, then that'll be their choice.
But Charlotte, would you go one step further? Would you say actually, in the modern age, and you talk about a woman's time, it's not just the responsibility of the mother to be the feeder?
Well, yeah, and particularly, let's just imagine, and it's a classic thing that feminists will say, but if it were men, would we be saying you ought to be breastfeeding for 18 months to reduce your risk of cancer? Because that will save the NHS money. Well, maybe, but it just seems to me that it's very...
If men could breastfeed, it would be lovely because they would get all the support they'd need. They could probably sit around in bed all day.
This is what I'm saying. This is not how the world is, then.
I'm really upset that women don't get the support they're telling us. They're getting inconsistent advice, and that really is inexcusable in this day and age. We know how to help women breastfeed, and they're not getting it.
Okay, we're going to end it there, but thank you all very much indeed. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.